Hello, everybody. You're very welcome. We're just letting people access right now. So if you'll just give us a moment while the seminar room fills up. And thank you all very much for joining us. I see a few familiar faces on the list here. So thank you for supporting this morning. And I see lots of people that I don't know as well, which is fantastic. And hopefully this is the start of some good relationships between different people. I see people from academia, I see people from NGOs, I see people who are in support roles. So that's fantastic. As I say, we're just letting the seminar room fill up a little bit, and we will kick off in a moment. Okay, I think we have stabilized, which is great. Thank you all very much for joining us for this conversation this morning, hosted by The Wheel, which is an introduction to engaged research. My name is Michael Foley, and I am the program manager for Trinity Patient and Public Involvement, the PPI Ignite office. But I also have worked in the NGO sector for a number of years, and in the public sector as well, in support of NGOs. So hopefully I can bring all of those different perspectives to hosting this morning. First and foremost, we have some housekeeping bits and pieces to do. So the first part is to just remind you all, I appreciate that Zoom is probably old hat for everybody now at this stage, and you've been on a million webinars and seminars and so on, but this is being run in seminar mode. So it means we can't see you and we can't hear you. We can just see your names. So certainly don't worry about, leaving your camera on or off or anything like that. We can't see you and we can't hear you. If you have any technical issues, then Emily is here, Emily Nelson, and she'll try to respond to support you so that you can send her a message on the chat at the bottom of the screen, and she hopefully will be able to support you with those where she can. If you have any questions for the speakers themselves, myself and Christina Noor will be looking at those and reading them, and we'll be trying to keep an eye on those and to parse them and put them to some of our panelists later on today. If you are on Twitter, and if you want to tweet out, the hashtag is #AccessEurope. And don't forget to use the capital A for Access and capital E for Europe, because if people are using a screen reader, it sounds a little bit like access syrup. I have nothing against accessing syrup, but just to keep the accessibility in mind, everybody. And also you can follow along on Twitter on the Twitter handle @EuropeAccess and @the_wheel_IRL, as you can see at the bottom of the screen there. So as I said, we have a great lineup of speakers today. And first and foremost, who I would like to introduce is Hugh O'Reilly, who is the Director of Development within The Wheel, to start us off. So if I could hand over to you, Hugh.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And apologies, folks, I am going to keep my camera off this morning because 20 minutes before the event happened, we had a power outage in my community, in my neighborhood. So I'm actually outside walking around trying to access 4G or whatever I can to talk to this morning. So apologies for that. And Michael, if I do cut out of my apologies, just carry on. But I'll do my best to hopefully keep enough Wi-Fi or enough 4G while I'm talking. Basically, yeah, I just wanted to say a few words on behalf of The Wheel. First of all, to welcome you all here today. We're delighted to do this. I suppose The Wheel's engagement in engaged research has been sort of over many years now at this stage. I certainly remember meeting Kate, who'll be speaking next, when she first joined Campus Engage, and she'll remind you, I'm sure, when she first started in Campus Engage, but I know it's maybe 7-8 years ago. The big interest, I suppose, from our point of view was seeing how European funding was moving towards certainly under Horizon 2020 initially, and now obviously even more so under Horizon Europe, which is the follow-on program, seeing how societal challenges are becoming more and more part of what the Engage research agenda is all about. And I suppose what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve is to sort of look at how civil society can engage in that, because obviously within civil society we have members within our organization who are sort of waking up and going out every day and trying to tackle key societal challenges, whether that be homelessness, whether that be youth interventions, helping older people, etc., etc. So there's a huge opportunity, at least we feel there's been a huge opportunity for many years for civil society and academia and policymakers and the private sector to collaborate and engage more and more in the Engage research arena. So I suppose who you're going to listen to today will be people who'll tell you a little bit more about that space. There are challenges in that space for civil society, not least of them funding. We all appreciate that and know that. But certainly, I suppose today would be hopefully the start of a conversation around how we can build greater collaborations in this space. We did do a version of this, I remember, in Woodkey a couple of years ago, which was supposed to be the kickoff of this type of collaboration event and to build into a series of things. And then COVID happened, and that was the end of it, or for a period of time. But sort of we're coming out of that now, and we think there's an opportunity to sort of reignite that again. And obviously, thanks to our own Access Europe team of Emma, Christina, and Emily, because this is a key part in terms of accessing European funding as well, and they're certainly taking an initiative on it within the Wheels team. So listen, I'm not going to say anything more than that, just to welcome you. Hope you enjoy the day. See this as the start of a conversation, not the end of a conversation, and I'll hand back to you, Michael, and thanks very much for listening.
You're on mute there.
Thank you very much, Hugh. Yes, and as you can see, despite the fact that it's all old hat for us, that you can still be on mute and not realize. So I can see from one or two of the messages there that our chat, we're just kicking that into action now. We just seem to be having a little bit of problems kicking that off, but hopefully the chat will be available to people. And certainly Emily is keeping an eye on the questions and answers as well. Just if people do have technical issues, I know that those are working. So certainly you can put your questions into the chat.
Just jumping in here, yes, we're on it. So there seems to be something in the, we will handle that, just letting you know.
Yeah, but thankfully in the interim, we have Kate Morris, who many of you may know from Campus Engage in the Irish Universities Association. That Kate, I suppose, is somebody who everybody who is working in engaged research, both in Ireland and across Europe, is familiar with. And certainly she has spoken internationally, but she has really made Ireland a driving force in this area. And I would hope that Kate will probably talk you through what she means by engaged research. But really, at the heart of it, it is about what today is about. It is about the bringing together of different stakeholders in order to tackle major societal challenges. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Kate Morris.
Thank you very much, Michael Foley. I'm really, really pleased to be here. Just a sincere thank you to the Wheel and to our colleagues across the system for giving us this opportunity to talk to you kind of on the 101 of what is engaged research and the why we're invested in it and why we're passionate about driving it in the right direction with and for you all. So the big thing is what's in it for you guys. There's a real mix of you in the audience today. Some of you like CEOs of civil society organizations, researchers. So I'm going to do my best just to give you a little 101 and a bit of the history, and then share some tools and opportunities with you in the next 10 minutes. So that's the challenge. But first and foremost, like, why are we doing this? And I fundamentally believe whatever the societal challenge, whether it's housing, childcare, all the bits coming out in the budget today, we cannot formulate effective public policy, programs, services, unless we're working with all members of society to inform them, understand cause and effect, and drive implementation for impact. So a quick 101. Who's the Irish Universities Association? Well, basically, it's based on Merrion Square, and it's where the 8 presidents of each of the universities come together and they talk strategy, policy, and make sure the universities are fit for purpose, kind of peeking over the horizon, what's coming around the corner, and making sure the institutions are driving change for effect. So across the system in these institutions, we now have vice presidents and directors for engagement who are there in that role to ensure that we are implementing, embedding, scaling effective engaged research infrastructures to deliver societal impact across research and innovation. So bringing you back to where this all began, well, back in 2014, we brought many people together to formulate a 10-point charter on how we want our institutions to embed engagement, civil society engagement. And one of these 10 points is the driving of engaged research for societal impact. And each of these lovely individuals came together in Dublin Castle and they signed up to this charter. So now they are basically tasked with making it happen. So quick 101 on the history. Well, once this charter had been signed, we brought together hundreds of individuals through group consultations, one-on-one conversations about to build a terminology and a framework on how to do engaged research for societal impact. And what came of this was a report that we launched with all the various key movers and shakers across the system, which laid out a framework, a how-to framework. And from this framework, we worked with IRC, who originally funded us, Enterprise Ireland, Horizon 2020 colleagues, SFI and others, to build a capacity program, so a capacity building program to support staff and colleagues on how to do this. And now we probably trained close to a couple of thousand individuals across the system. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. But we also put in place a brokerage infrastructure to bring together all of these societal stakeholders that are essential to informing the research question, research implementation for societal impact. And we drafted a series of how-to guides and policy briefs to better inform those policy officials who are drafting policy in this space. And lo and behold, 2022 comes around, we have a new Department of Further Higher Education with the new Department of Evidence for Public Policy, with the new Impact 2030 strategy, which all articulate how and why we need stakeholders involved in the research and innovation space. And most importantly, we have the impact, or the PPI network Ignite, which Avril and Michael and lots of colleagues here are involved with. And also to say that we work very closely with SFI as well. I see our Mari colleagues are here. So it's this always collaborative approach, everybody on the bus, consulting to drive this policy implementation forward. As I mentioned, these are our colleagues, risk takers within the department who are driving this agenda. And it's our job in the IUA to work with these individuals to make sure that we're right, it's being driven in the right direction. And this is a quick flash up of our consultation process. So what is engaged research? So we drafted and we consulted on this definition, and we try hard to make sure this is implemented and is in policy strategies related documents. So it's a wide range of rigorous research approaches and methodologies that share a common interest in collaborative engagement and involvement in research that is advanced with stakeholders rather than for them. And those stakeholders or partners can be our public patients, policy officials, professionals, product users, policymakers, industry and other actors, etc. So it's a wide range. So it's trying to capture all of those groups under one umbrella to be a voice and a vision and bring these stakeholders together. And this is a quick diagram of who all of those stakeholders are. So kind of 4 general categories of public, civil society organizations and charities, business, and public sector, including health, educational, cultural services, and so on. So we have these 3 how-to guides. I'm going to pop them up later in the chat so you can download these and read them. They're really for you. This is what's in it for you. These are guidelines on how to work together to apply for funding, to work on impact planning, etc. And Emma's going to chat about this later, but what's really exciting is at a European level, they've really, they've drunk the Kool-Aid. They're on board. And if you want to be applying for any research calls, which Chiara will speak a bit about later, particularly in Pillar 2 and the societal challenges, you must be working with science, with citizens, civil society, and others to implement and work on project for co-design, co-creation, engagement methodologies, etc. So that's a real coup, and it's quite exciting. But now we have to build competency and capacity across the system and make sure it's fit for purpose and funded for purpose. Just to flag with you also that there are lots of opportunities across the system where researchers can bring in societal partners, individuals. There's still a big bit of learning to do out there in terms of how we bring them in and how we fund and how we implement. But there's a lot of movement. So in the IRC, we have our new foundations call. There's a new Dorothy Research Fellowship Scheme, which I'm going to be sitting on the interview panel for that, which is very exciting. SFI, all of those, the SFI challenges have to be working with societal partners and so on. HRB, which Michael will hopefully talk a little bit about later on in their work about bringing patients into the research cycle. And the EPA again has other opportunities. So these funding calls are all up online, and we can share links to those at a later date. So other areas that we've been trying to focus our limited capacity and attention is this building capacity. So working with many of the colleagues on the panel today and our funding leads, our funding agency leaders, and Royal Irish Academy, THEA, which is the representative group for technological universities and ITs. So to build this capacity program and making sure that it's fit for purpose. And it's, as I mentioned there, these are all our colleagues involved in the building of this six-week course, but it's an online program, 6 weeks, competitively applied for. So we're going to be putting out a call later on in the year, hopefully now, to get this up and running again. We've already had a cohort who've taken it, and they are now trained as trainers to deliver engaged research for societal impact training across the system. This is all open access. All the materials are open to colleagues across the system. Big believers in open access and sharing what works, tools and resources. So if you want to apply for this, I'll tell you now, take up your phone and follow us on Twitter, which is campus_engage. And we'll be putting out the opportunity through Twitter later on in the year. You can also sign up to our database, which I'll show you later. So the course it's a 6-week course. It looks at everything from methodological approaches for engagement, realizing impact. How do we realize impact through the research implementation phase and evaluating, mobilizing research for public policy and practice change. This is a real focus area now going forward. It's all in our new research innovation strategy. The Department of Further Higher Ed has a specific unit now dedicated to research innovation for public policy, where the CSOs public are a fundamental ingredient to making sure policy is evidence informed, fit for purpose, implemented effectively. And then Michael gives a one-day facilitator training session, which was, we got an outstanding response to that at the first iteration. So that is also, it's a one-day how to become a facilitator training in this capacity building program we are driving. And just to make sure you're aware, this is funded through the HEA and through the Department of Further Higher Ed. So with their support and investment in this. And this training is based on case studies of what works, like Aoife's work in Marai, DCU's work in the Water Institute, and so on. So really grounding the training program on what works, case studies, and these case studies illustrating how we bring in civil society partners into the research process to inform and achieve the outcomes, intended outcomes and impact. Other types of initiatives we're trying to drive increasingly is these types of brokerage sessions where we bring together stakeholders, consider societal challenges, relate policy initiatives and strategies, look at the evidence out there and present it to senior civil servants and societal stakeholders in research and innovation. So it's our aim and ambition and our mission this year to deliver more of these. And we need to think about how we can do that with your organizations, with the wheel, to drive this agenda forward. Some of you may have seen other ways of promoting this work and demonstrating to all of society how researchers, innovators are addressing societal challenges and making change on the ground, affecting people's day-to-day lives, is an RTE documentary that we made called Changemakers. And in this documentary, we highlight all of these positive initiatives that are happening across the system, interconnected with various departments and various groups in society. I think it's still on RTE Player. Spotted it there the other day if you want to go in and have a little look at that. So that's it really. I want to keep it short, light and tight, and give Emma lots of insights and information that she can share on the, rather than going into that space, which we do in our training as well, but just to give you a broad one-on-one on what it's changed out there. There's a lot that's changed, and we're in an exciting space. We haven't got it right, that's for sure. And we need better connectivity. We need better infrastructures to support this work. And of course, any strategies without associated budget, they're just wish lists. So we need to continue to engage and advocate for how this work is supported on an equal footing and an equal basis, bringing in essential insights to understand the cause and the effect of societal challenges. Again, from emissions, housing crisis, childcare, all of those things that we need to be addressing through research and innovation. There is really no other way. So I'll pass you back to Michael. I hope that was informative. I'll ask you again to sign up to our Twitter handle @campus_engage. That's where we'll advertise that training, brokerage events, all of those exciting things. Always drop us an email. And finally, you can sign up to our databases, which is where we push out information as well. So that's it. Thanks for listening. I hope that was okay, Michael.
Thank you very much for that, Kate. That, I think, gives everybody, now, obviously, after that, Kate is such a powerhouse, you may need to go for a lie down after all of that information. But it is true to say that Kate has actually driven a huge agenda in this area, because I think, Kate, it's fair to say that really you believe passionately that these societal challenges that we face around the environment, around issues on crime, issues on health, that they can only really be done together. Like the NGOs have to play a role, researchers have to play a role, the public sector has to play a role, everybody has to do something.
Yeah, I think, Michael, on that note, Ireland has a real issue with policy implementation, and that means associated practice change, programs, implementation of programs associated with policy. And what we can see, looking back in history, Irish Water, I personally we need some way to pay to manage and upgrade our water system. But when you don't engage and you don't consult with individuals and exchange knowledge on what needs to happen, what needs to change, we have issues. Yeah. So if we want to address our policy implementation deficit, if we want to see change on the ground, we have to work together. I think, and the EU Commission gets this. The European associated funding programs get this. So it's quite a radical change in criteria, and we haven't got the infrastructures right. So there's work to do. Yes, but we, step by step, how to eat an elephant, piece by piece.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Kate. And I did see a question in saying, can people register so far for the course? But I think what you're saying is that basically you need to just follow, and as soon as that registration is available, then Campus Engage will be tweeting out about it.
Exactly. So please, @campus_engage. That's our Twitter handle. We've had a really positive response. 5 stars to Michael Averill and all the colleagues who delivered it with us. Really positive response. We can share that evaluation with people if they're interested. But we just got sign off from our VPs last week at our steering committee to go ahead with round 2 of that. And of course, people like Christine as well, who took the original course, will be supporting the delivery of that and leading the Wheels agenda in that space. We want to work with you again to achieve success in that space.
Great stuff. Thank you very much for that, Kate. And now I would like to pass over to Emma Murta, who is the European Programme Manager for the Wheel.
Yeah, hi, thanks very much, Michael, and thank you, Kate. That was an excellent kind of overview of everything. And just to say, we can keep people up to date as well, and when that course is out, and when, just 1 second now till I share my screen, we can keep people up to date. This group of people here, we can keep them informed about everything that's happening in the engaged research space, and we can also forward any kind of publications or anything. So if you have anything, whether it's your evaluation, Kate, that you want to share, or those documents that you mentioned, we're going to do a comprehensive follow-up email to everybody. So everything that you mentioned, slides, everything will be sent to you in a follow-up email today. But yeah, I just wanted to talk briefly about the EU context, which Kate touched on already, of engaged research, and specifically how EU funding programmes can be a vehicle for driving engaged research in Ireland. So ultimately what we'd love to have is kind of a for-purpose programme to try and build the capacity of civil society to take leadership in the engaged research space. I think a lot of onus is put on the researchers, that it's the researchers that need to be getting new skills and building relationships and identifying opportunities. But if we're going to take the ethos of engaged research and full and equal partnership seriously, it should also, there needs to be leadership from the civil society point of view as well. So we would love to be able to promote that, and that's ultimately what we're working towards. But for now, like that program doesn't exist yet. It's kind of a pie in the sky ambition that we have. But ultimately what we do have at the moment is our Access Europe program, and this is a program that has a strong link to research that we can use to kind of further our goals in this area. So just to tell you a little bit about Access Europe, so it's a support and capacity building programme for Irish civil society organisations to better access EU funds and to engage in EU policy. It is funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs and it's delivered by the Wheel, and you can find out more on our Access Europe website there. In terms of what we do, we provide a lot of kind of information. So we research all of the different funding opportunities that are out there on behalf of the sector. This is applicable to research offices as well, who, I'm sure are also doing this work. So try and avoid duplicating that effort. We do a lot of research, any of the Horizon calls or any other calls that are relevant to societal challenges and that might have a civil society kind of angle to them. We research all of those. We try and summarize them into more easily digestible information than what is typical of a lot of the kind of communications that come out from big programs like Horizon. We try to make them easy to scan and to see for people if there's opportunities in there for them. So we do that. We have a monthly newsletter and a database that we maintain on our website. So a lot of what we're doing is kind of researching and kind of translating for the sector what are the opportunities that are out there. We do events and trainings like this one. We provide help desk support to organisations to get started on their EU funding journey. And we cover all the programmes, including the research and innovation programmes like Horizon. So we have a very broad remit, but you can see where there is that kind of interest there because Horizon does exist and it's such a big program. And then also network building. So that's a little bit of what we're doing here today. And it was very nice actually to see, as my colleagues were talking, I was noticing people putting in their about their organizations and what their work and everything like that in the chat. So it's nice to see, part of our role is to provide network building and kind of partner brokerage opportunities, whether that's between sectors, like between the research sector and the community sector, or whether it's on a European level to try and link organizations in with European counterparts. But a huge part of it is network building, and that's part of and that's a key to driving our engaged research agenda. Our target group for Access Europe is quite broad. It includes the usual suspects like NGOs and community-based organisations and social movements and what you'd expect, but it also includes things like academia and city and county councils and regional assemblies. And I suppose our interpretation of this is that academia certainly doesn't need our help in writing applications the same way as community-based organisations would, but they could really do with our help when it comes to building partnerships across the sectors, and particularly building partnerships with community-based organisations. So that's something that we can really do to support academia, and that's again another reason why we're kind of leveraging Access Europe to try and further our engaged research goals. So that's basically Access Europe, and I'm very aware that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour there. But I suppose, and I think I've already kind of demonstrated that the linkage between Access Europe and engaged research. But I suppose what it really kind of converges on is with Horizon Europe. So basically, Access Europe is all about including the sector, or increasing the sector's participation in EU funding programs. And the biggest of those programs is obviously Horizon Europe. So our Access Europe goals and our Engage research goals converge with Horizon Europe. And you'll notice I do say other programs there as well, because there are other programs that can include kind of research elements to them, but Horizon is definitely the main one. So by supporting Horizon, we can, and participation of civil society in Horizon and engaged research projects, we can simultaneously further our kind of broader engaged research agenda. Now, obviously, you know, what we're doing here is we're trying to start a conversation around engaged research and get some relationships built and start making some connections. There may well be national projects that come out of that as well, and that's a good thing, because ultimately oftentimes it's the national projects that are the precursor for the bigger kind of EU projects. But really, you know, this is just about kind of starting that conversation and starting that journey to try and lead ultimately towards more Horizon projects and more Horizon collaboration in Ireland between the different sectors. The fact that, and Kate alluded to this, even more advantageous is the fact that Horizon happens to be so deeply rooted in engaged research. So that's just kind of a happy coincidence in the way, but I suppose it's not really a coincidence, because Horizon is the biggest and probably most progressive research and innovation program in the world. And so they obviously see that the way forward is in an engaged way forward. But just to look a little bit at that, it's been, you know, even when engaged research wasn't, I would imagine, as trendy a term back in 2002, with the establishment of the European Research Area, there was this emphasis on cross-sectoral partnerships to overcome fragmentation of research effort. And Horizon Europe, in the most recent, looking at the most recent programme guide, which would have came out at the beginning of this programme, which was around 2021, it has a strong commitment to open science and open collaboration with all relevant knowledge actors, including academia, industry, public authorities, end users, citizens, and society at large. And oftentimes it is civil society or community and voluntary groups that are the kind of custodians to that end user, particularly if these end users are of a marginalized community, and particularly when it comes to societal challenges, it is our sector, the community and voluntary sector, that tend to be the kind of representatives there. And overall, there's a focus on better and more societal engagement in research and innovation. This is also seen in programs like the Interregs, where they emphasize this quadruple helix approach. And this was developed specifically to include civil society. It used to be a triple helix approach before there was a realization that without civil society, you can't achieve the most impactful results when it comes to societal challenges. So it really works out that not only do we have the capacity to give to EU programs at the wheel, we have Access Europe, but those EU programs tend to be very progressive when it comes to engaged research, and they're great vehicles for creating a better engaged research ecosystem in Ireland. And the best way to demonstrate this, I think, is by listening to people who have experience of engaged research EU funded projects. So I have a short video here that I'm going to show you that hopefully will work, and hopefully people will tell me if the sound isn't working. So I'll go ahead and press play now, but I think it gives you a little bit of a snapshot into the experience of engaged research projects.
We started with engaged research projects to support national and international best practice research in palliative care.
We became involved to strengthen our understanding of various rural issues, to in turn improve our credibility in those areas and to be able to exert more influence in those areas. Our first involvement was in Robismo, which was looking at rural enterprise across the European Union.
The aim of the My Support study is to support healthcare staff to have those end-of-life care discussions with family carers of people with advanced dementia. We supported the project by providing knowledge transfer and exchange, mentoring and support.
Our strongest strength is that we have a lot of access to local community groups and in turn direct access to the people that are the subjects of the research project. It was bigger, much bigger in scale than we had been used to. It involved a good number of universities, different research bodies, institutes, cooperatives, and a whole load of different work cultures and methods of doing things that all had to kind of blend together to get the job done. So having a strong coordinator who really put a heavy emphasis on more communication was hugely important.
We were very aware that we would need to be flexible and innovative because of the challenges of the project timeline, and that we would be working across different countries and different time zones and different priorities.
Irish Rural Link learned a lot from our engagement in the Rubismo project. The first thing is we learned that we're capable of taking full part in an engaged research project. So our credibility in that area is much enhanced. We know we've done it. They don't come much bigger than Horizon projects in terms of research projects. So we'd be very confident taking part in any research project.
It was very interesting to see how they implemented a project and a palliative care intervention internationally. And it also increased our contacts and the reputation of the Institute as a credible partner on an EU level on further calls like this.
I think it's very important that charities and community groups take an active role in research. For the simple reason that research is the only real effective way that your voice is going to be shared.
Research provides the evidence that can inform policymakers to change policies, and it's only through evidence-based knowledge that we will be able to make sure that in our case, in the area of healthcare and palliative care, that we are improving the quality of life of people in the right way.
There is a perception that research is something for the universities or the academics. That's not true. It's clear that the best research fully involves the stakeholders as strongly as possible.
The value of EU funding for organisations like ours has been exceptional. It has provided us with access to other researchers, other networks, other providers of palliative care services, both at a national and international level.
EU funding was vital to the project that we're involved in, the Rubismo project. It simply never would have happened without the backing of EU funding.
Just do it. Just pick up the phone, get involved, because it's through learning that we will really be able to make a difference, and not only at a national level, but also at an international level.
I'd recommend that organisations get involved in research. It's essential to being able to tell your story effectively. If you're not involved in research, then you really as an organisation need to ask yourself who is speaking for you and why are you not speaking for yourself.
Great. So a huge thank you to Mary Rabbit of the All-Ireland Institute of Hospice and Palliative Care and Brendan Mullery of Irish Rural Link for sharing their stories there. And I think some really inspiring words there, particularly, you know, if you're not telling your story, who is? So I think that's a really good takeaway and a really good kind of think piece, I suppose, to if you're on the fence about whether to get involved in research or not, that can often be the question that helps decide it for you. So look, I'm going to just quickly finish up because we will have more information later on, but we've talked about how we're going to capitalise on our Access Europe programme and EU funding to drive our engaged research agenda. But what will it actually look like, I suppose? So it kind of starts with this conference, basically. What we're aiming to do here today, and we have over 100 people here today now, to try and get a common understanding of what is engaged research, that kind of to have an understanding of that terminology so that we can continue the conversation. So from here, we have we're going to be running a training session at the end of this year aimed at civil society and building their capacity to engage in research. So that's actually, as Kate mentioned, my colleague Christina did that engaged research course that Kate spoke about, and this is part of her course. We'll be running a session like that. So that'll be very much aimed at civil society and for them to get the research or the skills to kind of competently or confidently, I should say, engage and start their kind of research journey. So that's coming before the end of the year, and we'll keep you informed about that. And then also we have we're looking at in 2023 bringing together researchers and civil society representatives in person to discuss their shared work and to organise kind of thematic events around key EU policy areas where we can bring together researchers working on a topic and civil society groups working on a topic to discuss, to kind of exchange, to network and to build connections and to hopefully lead to projects ultimately. So I'll have more information about all of that later. But really what we're looking at is to try and from this, the start of it is to start a conversation and then ultimately to help support projects that could potentially go for EU funding or national funding. But like I said, there'll be more information on next steps later on. But for now, I can hand back over to Michael for our panel discussion, I think.
Thank you very much for that, Emma. And I think what's great about seeing Irish Rural Link and the All Ireland Institute for Hospice and Palliative Care is that these are not massive charities. You know, they're not the big dogs of the NGO sector. These are relatively small NGOs that have engaged. And I guess, I mean, without trying to put words in their mouth, I guess that what I heard them saying was really that being involved in these projects has really given them credibility. It's helped to bolster their own mission and help them to do things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose it's like what I got from them as well is that there's a sliding scale. It doesn't have to be full partnership and like, you know, if you're a smaller organization, you can start with a more manageable role in a research project and then work your way up from there. So you know, it's there's a whole spectrum to it. It's not an all or nothing thing, but for them the key message was to start and to just get involved and to start building the connections because it did lend so much to their organizations. So yeah, that's it. So over to you.
Okay, great stuff. What we're going to do now is we're going to have a panel discussion with some of our guests here today. And then once the panel discussion is finished, then Emma is going to respond from the Wheel's point of view in terms of what she's heard and provide some level of sum up about this. I often find when I'm really engaged in a conversation like this, it's often hard to remember certain things. So Emma will be there to remember that for us and to kind of reflect it back to us in terms of what she's hearing and how that actually works in the context of what Access Europe is trying to do and what the Wheel is trying to achieve out of all of this. So we will have our panel discussion until 11:15, and then we will have a break for 10 minutes for people to grab a glass of water or whatever. And then Emma will come back at 11:25 in order to give us her take on the conversation. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to introduce some of our guests. Dr. John Bartlett is the head of research at Atlantic Technological University, Sligo. He was the founding director of the Centre for Sustainability and a founder of the Contracts Research Unit at ATU Sligo. Aoife Dean is the Communications and Public Engagement Manager at MARI, which is the SFI Research Centre for Energy, Climate and the Marine at UCC. And she has over 20 years experience in terms of public engagement and this kind of bridge, I suppose, between science and different types of publics. I hate the phrase the general public. There's nothing general about the public. So if I do use that, feel free to cut me off. Dr. Avril Kennan is the CEO of Health Research Charities Ireland, which is an organisation that supports a community of approximately 40 health research charities. And just for full disclosure, myself and Avril have worked together on various projects for a number of years. So a bit like with Kate Morris, she is somebody who's really driven this agenda within the health research sector. And it really has paid off and has seen an awful lot both of investment and also of people's commitment being brought into that sector. And last, but believe me, by no means least, considering what it is we're about to start talking about, is Dr. Chiara Loda, who is the Cluster 2 National Contact Point. And before I say any more, I always think that when the person who has the European knowledge is introduced, people start to go. So I think what's really, really useful at this stage is to immediately go to you, Chiara, and for you to give us a sense about the work that you do and the particular area that you're focused on, which is Cluster 2, which is around culture, creativity, and inclusive society.
Thanks very much, Michael, for the nice introduction, and thanks to everyone for organizing it. So I am the National Contact Point for Cluster 2. And the focus of my cluster is democracy, cultural heritage, and socio-economic transformation. So I work in that area of Horizon Europe, where the mandate is social transformation or enhancement of democracies or preservation of our heritage. There is some popular wisdom that I work only with academics, like supporting them in the writing of the proposals. This is not true. This is just part of my job, and this is probably the longest running part. But there is another part, which is activating new potential as Emma said, as Kate said, like civil society is very welcome in Horizon Europe. And if we think at the topics of Cluster 2, not only Cluster 2 is not the exception. Cluster 2 is a sort of natural house for that. So what I do is kind of reaching out to civil society, explaining the potentials and the opportunity to be included. Then I will move just to say that like a civil society or like NGOs, they are fully eligible partners and their participation is fully funded by the European Union.
That's great, Chiara. And certainly what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go around each of our panel just to give them an opportunity to fill in some of the gaps in terms of their own experience. But certainly we'll be swinging back to you, Chiara, time and again in terms of helping us to really understand what that landscape looks like in terms of the opportunities that are there for people. So having said that now, Chiara, I suppose I'd like to turn to you, Avril, in terms of somebody who is involved directly with NGOs and the support of NGOs and the endeavor to try and bring NGOs together with the funding and also with the connections and contacts that are needed to forward their own agendas and to also sustain them while they are advocating for people.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So I suppose we're a little bit unusual in that we work with charities who have come to us specifically because they want to be involved in research. But that can look very different for different organizations. So, we've got the very big charities, cancer charities, heart charities, kids charities that fund research, and they are funders of research. They also get involved in all sorts of other ways. But then some of our members are tiny voluntary run organizations, like, for example, Sickle Cell and Thalassemia Ireland. It's a tiny little organization. They don't have money to fund research, but they're doing incredible things to make more research happen and to make research better. So we see the whole breadth of it. And I think what we see as well is how much value they can add. And I don't think that is fully recognized. I think, we see researchers as the experts, and sometimes we see charities as sort of receiving that expertise, but actually the reality is that there is expertise on both sides, and each has something to bring. So yeah, we ourselves get involved in research in all sorts of ways, and so it's about the funding of research, it's about making research more relevant, but it's also the policy of research, and we do a lot in that space as well, and making sure the charity, civil society organization voice is part of policy around it as well. So it's very, very broad.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Avril. And I suppose for full disclosure, we should probably say that you were a researcher as well at a previous time. So you've spent your time in front of the microscope. So I think it's great to have you within that role, but also being able to bridge that gap between the understanding of the researcher and the civil society organization.
Yeah, indeed. And you see, I know how little researchers know sometimes because I was one. And that's actually a very useful thing to know.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much for that, Avril. And I suppose the next part along the line are the people who, if you like, are at the front line of trying to bridge those relationships between researchers and the different publics that they are trying to form relationships with. And I suppose, Aoife, that's really the space that you've inhabited for so long.
Yes, Michael. I suppose there's different levels of engagement that we've been alluding to, I suppose, along the ladder, or maybe a spectrum is a better way to put it. But from providing those accessible research insights that might inform decision making and hopefully evidence-based decision making, like we've been talking about, but of course, more importantly, right through to consultation and beyond that to co-creation and co-production and co-implementation. And so I suppose for researchers, really, it's the opportunity to engage with those impacted by the research, and be they the policymakers or communities or end users and publics in their various forms, as you say, but so as that they can actually inform the research direction, which will ultimately make it more relevant, more applicable, fit for purpose. And as Avril says, it's actually accessing that local or sector-based knowledge that we don't have that viewpoint, and that, I suppose, evidence-based, from their perspective, it's the lived experience, I suppose, is the way to put it, and to help to frame the problem in the first place, and then right through the research life cycle to inform the research process, enhance that, and ensure that those outcomes are fit for purpose, as you say. So the ultimate goal is kind of empowerment, but it's valuing all of the external knowledge and local knowledge to ensure that we can have a better outcome, really, and that the research is more impactful, really.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Aoife. And I guess that there is that piece where it is about reaching out to those different communities, gaining that local knowledge. But again, it's, and I suppose this is part and parcel of what engaged research is about, that, there's something at that local level that people see the use and the benefit of bothering with these relationships as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I suppose, like everything in life, there has to be something in it for everyone. And I think usually for us as researchers, it ends up being quite a symbiotic relationship, because we benefit from maybe a living lab, in a sense, in the area that we're working in, or with the communities or policymakers, whoever we're working with, to almost as I say, right through from the problem framing, but to test and trial as well with some of the potential solutions. And usually it isn't a technical barrier or an engineering problem. It's usually a socioeconomic issue that might affect, uptake, or might affect whether or not the proposed solution is fit for purpose, as we said. So usually it's of benefit to the researchers that way, but of course the local community, whatever form that community may take, will usually benefit as well, because of course they're getting to input and make a decision about, hopefully if it's a democratic process, about what kind of solution is going to work for their context.
If it's a democratic process.
Yeah, there's a lot of ifs along that journey, but I mean, yeah, we're doing a lot of work in UCC around deliberative democracy and those processes as well, and mini publics and citizen juries and so on. So exploring those for us as well is great for the research journey, because it's about exploring innovative ways to engage. And for us in Mari and at UCC, that's really an important area of research for us at the moment, that exploratory piece.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Aoife. And John, I suppose the important thing is to have a university, an institution backing this work, and really being able to provide the supports that are available to really value the significant physical and emotional labor that goes into forming these relationships.
Absolutely, and what it comes down to really is the understanding of a particular organization, a particular university, of its mission. We are public service organizations. We are a well of knowledge and expertise and equipment and networks, which, if we're fulfilling our mission properly, should be made available to the full region we're in nationally and internationally. So it is really about that. I mean, I come myself, I'm an environmental scientist. I come from a sustainability background, you know, and sustainability can only be achieved when the citizen, the individual citizen, is empowered to understand their situation and to act on that. We've talked, for many years, think global, act local. It's as simple as that. So it's about an organization, if it understands its mission, then organizing itself in such a way that it is open, that it's welcoming, and that it does make those expertise available to community groups and all groups that are involved in the sustainability journey, which of course isn't just environmental, it is social and economic as well.
And actually, I suppose, because it's come in on the questions, and I think it's a useful place for us to start, particularly for NGOs that are dealing with groups that, when you talk about empowerment, that are dealing with being at the back of the queue or not getting to the table. I don't like to use the word hard to reach. I don't like to use the word vulnerable, but people who have often had the chips stacked against them, in multiple ways, facing into a relationship with what they see as being an institution that is well funded, that has authority, that speaks, that when it speaks, that different actors listen across the sectors. So, is there a piece here which is really about that kind of trying to redress that, rather than assume that we can empower people? That what is it that we can do, or what is it that institutions can do to really tackle that and grapple with it?
Well, it comes back to that mission piece. Does the organization really understand its mission in the first instance? Because without a doubt, as other speakers have said it here, the best research is multidisciplinary, and it is quadruple helix. And I can give you an example later. We're currently mentoring over 150 sustainable energy communities, which are proper quadruple helix entities, where communities, local authorities, higher education and business are sitting at a table and have left their, corporate jackets outside the door, and they're sitting with parity of esteem right from the first idea forward. That's where the best research comes from. So it's in everybody's interest from that perspective. I know that in the past, certainly there has been, I suppose, what people would have called the town and gown approach, where these organizations would have been seen as, large, impenetrable, and they can be that. There's no doubt about that. But I come from a sector with the Institutes of Technology, which were regionally based, and their original mission had, a regional development function. God help us all. Whereas in fact it should be regional sustainability in the first instance, and then development. But if you looked at the TU Act, we've lobbied very hard and have been successful in that legislation to get communities and citizens in the language of the Act as well, so that our mission going forward is very much rooted in serving citizens and communities, as well as businesses and the region. Now, we're young, obviously, and in terms of forming, storming, norming and performing, we're at the late forming stage and the early storming stage. But I'm very much looking forward to organizations like ours and universities across the island really taking up this mantle. And timing is everything. Okay, timing really is everything. I tell an old chestnut, my friends are sick of hearing it, where I got my first environmental qualification in 1984. And people said to me, that's the up and coming thing, And every year since then, people have said, oh yes, that's the up and coming thing. But I do have a sense now in the last few years that we are getting to a point where people are starting to understand that this really is the #1 agenda, sustainability is. We've talked in the last few years in terms of future scanning, we've talked about future conflicts or wars being based on water and on energy. We've seen very recently, while it wasn't the cause of the most recent conflict, certainly energy has been weaponized in a way that right down to today's budget, we're talking about it in a way we've never talked about it before. Now we can also talk about global economics, which is another issue, but in a very practical sense, that has come full circle right down to everybody's table. So it's getting all of us at the table to discuss these issues, come up with the best ideas, as Aoife has said, to frame the question in the best possible way in terms of success of answering it, and then get as many bodies as possible involved in generating the data to get the answer. So it's in all our interests to do that.
Yeah. And actually, if I could swing you back in on this, Aoife, that idea that, you know, what is being dealt with at a university level is oftentimes everybody's business. This idea that academia is working on things and on topics that are far too esoteric for the rest of us to understand. But there is a piece here about the ethics of interaction and about how to treat and work with and deal with people ethically at a ground level. What's been your experience of that?
So that's very much been a journey for us, I would say, in the research centre that I'm in within UCC. So, you know, as John said, it's been a move from interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary, and for us now to transdisciplinary work. So I suppose really the evolution for us happened when we started to work with the social sciences. And so that really helped us to open up and understand the world of community development, and as you say, the ethics of engaging and engagement, and that's been a really important journey for us. And I suppose now we're increasingly working in these transdisciplinary teams, and you know, I think that's an important piece about engaged research in general. It's not a solo pursuit. It can't be. You don't really have one researcher as an engaged researcher. It does really take a team of academics working with the community partners, and hopefully along that quadruple helix model like we discussed, so you have the different representations. But even from an institutional perspective, it does need to be resourced, because you do need engagement support and professional services to work with the technical expertise that the researchers have, and also then social scientists working with us in that broader broader journey, I should say. So for us, we've also in UCC hired engaged research support officers. So, you know, Claire Watson, John Barimo, UCC's first engaged research support officer hired there last year. And that's really important for engaging with the researchers for the training, like the trainer course that we've done and rolling that out. But beyond that, being there throughout the projects to ensure that the researchers are, I suppose, engaging ethically, and that we're following community development principles. And we get that through external support and expertise as well. And particularly looking at, I suppose, the difficult area of, you know, evaluation and impact assessment. I'm veering slightly off here now, but it's just to try and show the multiple level of expertise that you need to be involved in a community engaged project, and to do that in not only an impactful way, but to do it in an ethically sound way. So I hope that addressed your question in some respects.
Yeah, no, that's great.
And if I could just follow up on that just for a second. Just taking up on what Avril was saying about, you know, the expertise being on both sides, and coming back to what Aoife is saying in terms of impact. In a very practical sense, NGOs are pretty much the main groups that can prove impact. So researchers need NGOs to understand what their impact will be, but B, also to measure it in a meaningful way. So in fact, it's not that they're or shouldn't be an add-on to the research exercise. They should be absolutely at the core of it.
And I suppose, Avril, that's an opportunity, I suppose, for you to swing in on that, in terms of that there's a piece here which I think is about researchers having an expectation that NGOs would be able to do that, but lots of NGOs just aren't funded, you know, to actually do these kinds of things and have these kind of relationships. You know, what kind of things are you hearing from HRCI partners?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, like I'm all my favorite topics are coming up, but, you know, we're so focused on impact at the moment. We're having an event on it, impact from research, societal benefit from research. We have an event in November on that, and we've actually just launched a research impact award, just for people to understand that when charities are involved in research, that's what they're looking for, and they have this huge, as John says, a huge role to play in ensuring that impact happens. There's real power in the relationship with a charity to ensure that impact. But there are challenges, particularly, I think, on the charity side. I'm using the term charity broadly, but you know, what we're seeing from our member organizations is they have all these requests coming in for their support, their help, their engagement. But actually, we haven't reached a place in Ireland yet where that expertise and that time is being really acknowledged in the process and rewarded in the process. And so there, you know, there's a lot of things we need to talk about in regard to that. I think I've been involved with researchers over many years in all sorts of different ways, and it's really rewarding. But I've also hit every imaginable challenge, you know. And so another thing we're doing at the moment is actually writing a guide on that very topic. How do we partner? How do researchers and charities partner? And what are the perspectives on each side? And how do we start to, in a very practical way, acknowledge, whether it's funding or something else, acknowledge that input from the charities? And we're not there yet. But I think events like today, you know, and what Emma and the Wheel are doing and is really important in bringing us all to the same page on that.
That's great. Thanks very much for that, Avril. And again, I suppose it's a useful thing to swing you back in on this, Chiara, that idea about what does the European Union, like what does its research arm expect? Does it expect for people to come with these relationships fully formed? Does it see itself as you know, an organization that can really, or a funder that can really foster these relationships, do you think?
Well, this is like a tricky question in a way that I wouldn't say that there is an explicit guideline. Being fully honest, I think that newcomers sometimes face some barriers. First, like the EU reward the consortia that work together in the past in a way that it is a funding agency. So we know that funding agencies are risk adverse. They don't like taking leap of faith, and you know, past success is the best predictor for future success. So we see sometimes that, you know, this rewarding mechanism for established cooperations, sometimes it is something that doesn't really support the formation of new partnerships. And that brings me down to the barriers that basically, if we think about the barriers faced by academics, one is trust. Basically, you know, when you write a proposal, that means that if you're funded, you will work together with these people for the next 3, 4, 5 years. You don't want energy vampires. So how do you avoid energy vampires? You are extremely picky about taking on board new people. Problem, you kind of miss out on many new cooperations that could be extremely nice, extremely fruitful, and so on. And this is something that I kind of made me think when I was reading the Q&A. Most of the questions, they were about how do we like form new partnerships. I mean, there are many people that are extremely good, that have a research interest, they would like to be involved, and they don't really know how to do it. So it is actually nice that Avril is working on this booklet on how to form like a new partnerships, because it's something that is extremely needed, and also that Access Europe is out there offering support. So back to your original question, Michael, I believe that the European Union in principle wants new partnerships to be formed. In practice, there are no incentive mechanisms for the inclusion of newcomers so far. And this is reflected in the conversations I have with my stakeholders. And of course, the barriers are not only from the academic side. Sometimes I talk to charity partners and they tell me, well, but we don't want to be included in a tokenistic way, or we're not really sure about the effort that will be required. We don't have huge admin capacity. So I mean, there are issues, and it is something that needs to be addressed.
Thanks very much for that, Chiara. And actually, I have an awful lot of sympathy, and I used to have a lot of empathy for NGOs saying, you know, we don't want to be involved at a tokenistic level. We don't just want our name on the application, and then 6 months later we hear, oh yeah, that project happened, or that project, or now you need to go to a meeting and you need to have a report, or you need to fill in timesheets. You know, there's a real danger among NGOs, as you said, Chiara, about energy vampires. You don't want somebody latching on to your NGO when you've already got enough to do without somebody coming along and actually just taking up your time doing administrative stuff in order to somehow provide the extra support for a grant or a kind of an idea that somehow we're supporting when really we're not, and worse, we're not being supported to support. You know, so I think it's a really live issue. But if we could stick with that idea of newcomers, Avril, I suppose that, and again, this is coming back to stuff that we've worked on together. There is that piece about how do you begin your relationships? How do you start things?
Yeah, I think, and I'm going to sort of take it back a step even before that. And I think, you know, one of the first things you have to do is get buy-in within your own organization, because you may be in a lucky, if you're here, you're interested and you know the value of research, or you're starting to understand it maybe, but that doesn't mean that your board or your colleagues understand it. And so, and that can be hard work, but it's worth putting the time into. You know, when I worked in a patient organization, I used to talk about our patient support service being care for now, but research being care for the future. And that seemed to work a little bit. So just coming at it creatively. So you need to get them on board. Then you need to know what your value is and what you want from research and what your value is, and really think that out, because there's no question you have a lot of value to add, but that needs to be written down in black and white for researchers to see, for everybody to see. And when you've done those things, then I guess it's just the thing that we do well in Ireland. It's making the connections, like looking at the universities, who is researching in your area, connecting in with people like John, like with Aoife, with Emma. You know, there's a lot of people out there that can help. Campus Engage is doing good stuff in that as well. A lot of people can help you find the right people, and then start with conversations and being, again, very clear, if those conversations progress, very clear about what you can give, but what you need. And, you know, I have just now, for the first time, started to put a memorandum of understanding in place with a research group that we're working with. And even already, I'm like, why did I not do this for every partnership I ever had? So yeah, those are the big things, I think.
And I think I love the fact that you're thinking, oh, why did we never actually sit down and sort these things out? But I think maybe earlier on in what you said there, in Ireland, we're great at making the connection. And it is that thing about imagining that these relationships are fluid, and that as soon as we try and pin things down, then we're blocking off things or we're closing off things. And yet at the same time, for researchers, so much of it is about actually capturing and putting down on paper. I suppose, Aoife and John, is it that thing that researchers probably feel a little bit more comfortable actually having down on paper what the nature of the relationship is?
Yeah, definitely. I think that unfortunately a lot of the funding calls that we're used to going for as well demand that, you know, I suppose level of certainty in some cases about what the deliverables are and when they're going to arrive. And of course, the issue with co-creation is that goes against the very nature of the process. So trying to write in that flexibility in such a way that's still acceptable within the funding call can be a challenge. And that's where, I guess, you know, these early relationships and early engagement, and sometimes you're trying to do this in a very rushed way because you've made the engagement, but now you've a funding call deadline breathing down your neck and you need more time to develop the relationship, but you also want to get this in. So there's those kind of, I suppose, those competing issues that are going ahead all the time. So like on both sides, I suppose on the relationship building side, like we have found that if there's, I suppose, kind of staged funding options are really useful for that. So, you know, if you can find a small grant, and they can often be supported through the wheel, through SFI or whoever it is. For example, in the Dingle project that, you know, we've been working on for the last kind of 4 years now, we started off with a small SFI, Science Foundation Ireland Discover grant of 50,000, just a 1-year project. And the community partner down there actually led that project, and it allowed us to kind of explore those relationships. And they're quite flexible funding structures as well. So that worked out really well. We built on that and put in a 2-year proposal, which Mara led, and that's still ongoing at the moment. And we tried to build in again about as much flexibility as possible within that. We're very lucky with Science Foundation Ireland, in fact, that they are trying to encourage this engaged research approach. And so they have been extremely flexible, and with COVID and everything else that went on. So that's been really useful. They've been very responsive, but we've kept in constant communication with them. And I think that's important as well, to let them know why things change, to let them know what else is going to happen in its place and why that's better. And then moving on from that, we built on that to the partners down in Dingle have now an Horizon project as well in the agri-food sector. And Claire Watson, one of our researchers, is also working with them on a creative climate action project with the farming community. All of those have been building on, so national and EU funding, building on those, that I suppose early kind of pilot project that allowed us to develop those relationships. Just one other thing before I move on as well, when Avril says we only thought of doing right now, something that we're doing in a new EU project where we're leading a work package on citizen empowerment is with all of the project partners. And this was a bit of a shock for me working at the EU level, when you realize the difference in understanding of terms and terminology and language and so on. You think that between researchers that would be fine, but of course when you've multiple stakeholders it becomes even more of a problem. And so taking the time to explore those definitions that you're going to agree, even what does engagement mean, what does empowerment mean, what does community of practice mean. And we're doing that now with David White, one of our new colleagues in here, who's helping us to explore that within that project, so as that we can all kind of start, I suppose, that we're all singing off the same hymn sheet, for want of a better word. And I think for us that's now become a good practice that we'll carry on going forward as well.
God, hallelujah. Thanks very much for that, sister. And finally, John, if I could swing you in on it and give you the last word on this.
Yeah, just to follow on from what Aoife was saying, yes, certainly researchers are used to partnership agreements and endless paperwork that goes with describing what we're planning to do and all the rest of it. But Avril mentioned an MOU, and we find that a particularly useful instrument. I wrote the first MOU for IT Sligo 27 years ago this year with the old health board as it was then. And it says very simply, we have a shared mission. We will work together into the future. This is why. These are the things that we will bring to bear. And then for each project, there's a project specific document, And that I find that works really well. But I suppose the last point I'd maybe make is that this isn't just about projects. This is about an entire societal or national, whichever way you want to put it, capacity and ambition for research as well. So it isn't just about bringing, we'll say, an NGO into a particular project. Again, Aoife mentioned solving small problems to start off with and then building up relationships over time. That's very important. And certainly we do that. But also what we tend to do is when we're getting somebody involved, we would say to them, well, look, you're looking at this project, which is in the future, but we have another one that's going at the moment. Why don't you sit in on a project meeting and hear and see how it works? Hear the language just as an observer, and later on we'll develop that conversation as to how you think you might interact with a future project. So it's really about that ambition, because we'll know we're successful when there are more ideas coming from civil society than there are coming from funding agencies or our own organizations.
That's great. Thank you very much for that, John. Thank you, John, Avril, Aoife, and Chiara. When we're going to take a short break now, and when we come back, we will have a response to what you've been saying from Emma. If people have questions, please keep them coming, because we'll have a little bit of space to put some questions back to people as well. Thanks to those of you who asked questions in the chat or in the Q&A already. And now we will take a short 10-minute break. It's almost 20 past now. We will be back at past. Thank you. Okay, we're still on our break now. For anybody who's tuned back in, we're still breaking, but if you are sitting around waiting for us to come back again, we'll have a little bit of extra time looking at some of the questions that came through. And there's one fairly straightforward question from Aveen, which I think is interesting, where Aveen was asking about whether small-scale community organizations are included in the term NGO. And I know that Aoife and the Marai team has been working with small-scale community organizations. And so absolutely, they are part of the engaged research approach and the engaged research family. And I think they even came up in the diagram that Kate Morris showed at the start, that as a stakeholder, it's quite broad. Where I think that there's an interesting question about that is when it comes to somebody like Chiara's work about whether that community organization is a legal entity that can receive and spend funding. That then becomes an issue in terms of European projects. But again, I think this is probably something that Emma would be able to address. But it's a really interesting question about whether community organizations can be part of that. I'm sure Avril would probably say that an awful lot of NGOs started as community organizations. They started at somebody's kitchen table because something was not being provided, that their condition or their disability or their illness was not being catered for in a particular way, or that there was a group that really wasn't being addressed and whose needs weren't being addressed. So I think that the line between community groups, unless they're like a geographical community group, that the line between them and NGOs has always been a very porous one, and that people certainly move towards structures where they become more formalized. The other question about research fatigue, I think, about the same people being called upon to support and help with researchers, and particularly for smaller organizations. I hope we've gone some way towards addressing that, but it is an interesting question from the point of view of an NGO, because if you are a relatively small NGO and you have 3 or 4 people who tend to volunteer for things and who will put their hand up and say, yeah, I'll go and meet them, or yeah, I'll find out what that's about, there can be sometimes a dynamic where other people go, oh, that's Michael's thing. That's what he does. Yeah, Michael does the researcher stuff. And it can put certain people in a spot where they become the only person who is doing that kind of engagement. And I think that that can be very tricky. And I think that the ambition for engaged research is that really we want more and more of it. We want more people to be involved. We want more perspectives and things like that. So I think that there is a danger that within an NGO, if it becomes one person's thing, that they very quickly become overwhelmed by the amount of calls there are on their time and on their perspective and on their expertise. And from, it's not so much that every researcher is looking for loads and loads from them, but if you have 12 researchers who are all looking for one thing from you at the same time, I think that can become very, very difficult very quickly for people. And so that there is a need for mechanisms in place in order to manage that kind of work. So for those of you who are just coming back to us on the break, I've just been filling in a little bit in terms of some of the questions that have cropped up in order to provide a little bit more context and perspective on it. As we referenced earlier on, the HRCI have done work in terms of starting the relationship between researchers and the patients and members of the public And they have a toolkit, which I was involved with, which is available from the HRCI website, along with some other material that they've developed from patient and public involvement perspectives. Certain parts of that are relevant across the board, and certainly it's a good place to start in terms of some of the engaged research stuff. And I see that Aoife has put a response there in the chat too. Okay, so just 2 minutes left before we kick off again with Emma Murta, who's going to provide a response to what she heard in the conversation, giving us a chance to recap on what's there, and also for the wheel to be able to talk about the work that it's doing in order to fill in some of the gaps around engaged research and the infrastructure, and to put people from NGOs and community organizations in the frame for being able to get the kind of financial and technical support that's necessary in order to be able to make best use of engaged research without feeling overwhelmed, or without feeling research fatigue, or without feeling that there's too much call on their time, without the kinds of supports that they need in order to make this a meaningful relationship for them.
My microphone goes. I just left, but I was furiously scribbling notes. So.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good, Emma, because every now and again I was thinking, oh, that's something that the wheel is probably doing. So, but I thought I'll leave you to be the voice on
trying
that.
to sum up everything. It was a great discussion, so there was lots to note. I'm trying to weave it all in. I won't be able to get all of it, but I'll make my best attempt anyway.
Yeah, and just to say to people as well, obviously we're recording this session, and people will be able to look back on the conversation as well itself, in order to understand that, you know, there was a number of nuanced points, I think, there as well, in terms of the input from Avril, from Chiara, from Aoife, and from John, that really constructs a complicated answer to a complicated question about how these relationships get formed. And it's so dependent on things like the size of your organization, the capacity that you have, the previous experience that you have, who you know, either formally or informally, that can give you a bit of a steer and a bit of a guide, and what your experience of working in partnership with other people is outside of working with researchers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think, and just to say as well, if people have questions, they can reach out to us as well. It's emma@wheel.ie, easy one to remember, and we should be able to follow up. If there's more specific questions that are unique to their organizations that they'd like answered, we're here to help with that. So, I suppose one of the kind of key takeaways is that you're not on your own. There is loads of help and support if this is something that you want to do as an organization. There's Campus Engage, there's us at the Wheel, there's other kind of supportive organizations like HRCI for the health kind of subsector. So there's loads of support there. You're never really on your own with it. They just, I think we'll be following up with a load of different tools and publications, things that have been mentioned, the slides, the recording, everything. So you don't have to try and absorb all of it in these 2 hours. But what I might do, is just summarize some of my key points, and there was so much there. And we will be kind of coming back to our panelists afterwards, so they'll have the last opportunity to kind of communicate their key takeaway and correct me if I misinterpreted anything that they said. But I did just, as I said, I was scribbling down notes of like some of my key takeaways from the event, and I have a couple of resources that might be useful for people. So a key thing, obviously, that I think was really well demonstrated was just how important engaged research is, that it's not a nice to have, it's a need to have, and that there is a need to work across sectors, that we can only really achieve change and impact and create good results if we work together. And something that struck me actually was just what I think John mentioned it about universities being publicly owned. shared spaces and mission-driven organizations. I think at least coming from the charity sector, we wouldn't necessarily think of that when we think of universities, that they are supposed to be serving the communities and the areas in which they work, and that we have that in common. We're both mission-driven organizations or mission-driven sectors. Universities are not ivory towers of kind of inaccessible or esoteric kind of knowledge or expertise. We're actually all in this together trying to figure out solutions, and really we should all be best friends. But I think that there's barriers that make that a little bit difficult. And I suppose, again, another key takeaway that I took from it was that it kind of all boils down to trust and relationship building. A huge amount of it kind of came down to that. Like Chiara talked about, wanting to avoid energy vampires and token, which I thought was a really good term for it. Like, because we're the same when I'm building a project, even if it's got no university point of view, when we're bringing in external partners, you just want to avoid anybody that's going to make your life more difficult going forward. Of course you do. And, universities are the same, charities, community volunteer organizations are the same. So, if you have a relationship and a trust with somebody, you can obviously go forward with that without having to have that anxiety. Avril talked about being clear on what you can give, but also what you need, and making sure that MOUs are in place. Again, it's just about clarity and having clear roles and a clear understanding of your relationship. Aoife talked about kind of exploring innovative ways of engaging and what they're doing in UCC around deliberative democracy, and also about the ethics of engaging to make sure that it's done right and best practices observed and things like that. And then, John mentioned being part of quadruple helix projects and this was something I really resonated with me, because I spent a lot of time managing European projects, and what I really liked about it was, whether you're a big university or a tiny NGO, when you were all sitting around that table at the partner meetings, you were all equal. It didn't matter, how many letters were after your name. It was about, trying to solve the problem together. So I think, everybody kind of alluded in some way or another to the fact that it's about having an ongoing trust and relationship and taking time to build those relationships, and not just when the deadline is looming. Now, obviously, both of our sectors actually operate off of deadlines most of the time. There's always a funding deadline, and that's something that we as the charity sector have in common with the academic sector. And we're equally as guilty to, shooting off emails and being like, can you partner in this project really quick? Or I need a letter of support, or I need that. But I think we all understand that that's not the best way of doing things. And really, like, it's one thing if you have a trusted partner that you can rely on for a last minute kind of endorsement or something like that. But when there's no relationship and there's no understanding there, it can seem a little bit, and it puts sometimes charities in particular in difficult situations, because they need to be doing everything they can to advance their mission and their need, and they feel a huge sense of responsibility of that, but they're often not getting paid, and they're often, it's a huge amount of time and it's risk, and essentially it all boils down to, if there was more trust and more mutual understanding and existing relationships there, everything would be easier. Even the kind of terminology thing that Aoife mentioned, just having that mutual shared vocabulary and the mutual understanding of what it is that you're talking about, all of that kind of boils down to having a relationship. And that's very hard though. Like, it's easy to say, oh, you just need to have relationships with each other, but that takes time, and we're all very, very busy. And how do we kind of take time to build these relationships? And I think one of the things that Avra mentioned in the form of, she was talking about I think it was probably Deborah Ireland, that when she was working there, it was like care for now versus care for the future. And that kind of resonated with me, that like all of this, it's not going to yield, you're not going to reach out and have a coffee with a researcher and start building a relationship, and then all of a sudden there's millions of euro funding coming in. It's not like that. It's an investment into the future. It's about seeing it as a long-term strand of your work, a strategic function of your work that will develop over years and years. And we often talk about that in terms of EU funding as well. So it was interesting. I'm always telling people EU funding is an investment. It's not going to pay off quick. It's not going to be necessarily easy, but it's a long-term investment into your organization. So I think there's that kind of piece now. So I think every organization, and people when they were asking, what should we be doing, like, to try and get started? Like, obviously there's what the wheel should be doing, and what support organizations like Campus Engage and all that kind of thing should be doing, which is the capacity building piece. And we're going to be working on that, networking events. And as I said, we'll have more information on that to bring people together. We have our database on accesseurope.ie. So it's a partner database. It's for EU funded projects. So we're promoting it out into Europe and everything. But there is a function in it where you can search by research, and you can search by research interests and see what organizations are out there trying to get involved in research and what they're interested in. And in the profile itself encourages people to say what they want, what strengths they can bring to a project, what they want to achieve, and all of that kind of thing. So there's different things that we can do, and then there's the things that the individual organization can do. And it is about, I think Avril mentioned it, it starts internally around a common understanding of what do we want to achieve through research and getting everybody on board, and then making time somewhere or another to build relationships and reach out and start to have conversations, so that when the deadline does loom, there is some kind of mutual understanding there. So that's a quick kind of summary. Like I said, we can go back to the panelists and they can correct me if they want, if I got anything wrong. But that was some of the notes that I scribbled down.
That's great. Thank you very much for that, Emma. And I think that certainly when a conversation is going and so much is rolling around, I think that it is very helpful for somebody to just play that listening ear and to reflect back what was being heard. Just one or two other things that had immediately struck me when you were talking is that this idea of an MOU, sometimes people imagine this as being, oh, well, we have to get the solicitor and we can't afford to have the company solicitor coming in, drawing up an MOU. I did a piece of work with the Alzheimer's Society and their dementia research advisory team, who are people living with dementia. And that we did an activity where we said, what do you want from researchers? And what do you not want from researchers? And we had a conversation about that. And then I said, what do you think researchers want from you? And what do you think they don't want from you? And then we had a conversation about that. And basically we drew up a guideline so that if anybody wanted to work with this team, they now know what time of day they want to work at. They now know what, that they want their tea with the meeting, if it's going to be a full day or whatever. So in other words, it was a real opportunity to just figure out what are the kind of ground rules from which we start from. And that it's not necessarily a legal document, but it is a good basis for getting down on paper. What do you want? What do you not want? And I think that's really important to just kind of put that out there. The other thing I would say is that there's lots of models as well out there that can really help with stuff like this. Hub na Nog, I think, that is supported by the department, that is showing how you can engage with younger people in these kind of deliberative processes, is all there and readily available, and a super guide along with the HRCI super guide. There's all kinds of different things that are out there in order to help with this, to help academics in terms of how they form good relationships with NGOs and with community groups. And then on the flip side, guides that help NGOs and community groups to understand what they can expect from researchers and what kind of pressures researchers are working under, which is the other thing, Emma, that is a real bugbear of mine. When people talk about ivory towers, I usually say, oh, you mean ivory basements? That it gives this idea that academics are working in these perfect, like almost like in greenhouses, far away from the rest of the world, whereas in fact a lot of academics are working with enormous workloads and trying to juggle an awful lot of different things at the same time, while also sustaining different relationships. Ivory basements is usually what I say when I talk about academics. But then again, John and Aoife, you might want to comment a little bit more on that in terms of the pressures that academics face.
I'm sorry, I'll come in there. So I think particularly with engaged research, it can be challenging because of the diverse skill set, as we said, that are required. And that's why I suppose constantly going on about it needing to be a team approach, because particularly for early career researchers, it's very challenging. It's the published either perish or published idea that they're getting pushed from maybe their institution or their supervisors, that concept, and therefore it can be extremely difficult for them to balance the requirements of an engaged research project that has all that relationship building and so on, with the other academic requirements. And so, you know, I suppose you need to find a support for that to make sure that that can work. For us, leadership was really important as well, you know, that it, I suppose from the top down within the university, that engaged research was seen as an important strategic approach, but also within Mara, we've been very lucky with the director that we have. Brian Gallagher is a big fan of this approach, as we know, and he is a big believer that obviously, you know, looking at technical or engineering challenges or science challenges on their own in a silo in our sector, but it doesn't really matter what the sector is kind of like looking at a jigsaw puzzle without all the pieces. So if we're not taking that socioeconomic and all those perspectives into approach. So I suppose, yeah, just to say there are a lot of pressures on the academic side, and we to try and remember as well, particularly with early career researchers, that they have a lot of pressures and are often starting out on this journey, and you know, may need to sometimes you know, learn as they go. And I suppose the reflection piece is really important for us in Mara as well, that we spend a lot of time on reflective learning, so is that we're building capacity internally as well as hopefully our partners building capacity. So I hope that's a useful insight.
Great. And of course as well, now, not to say that life in an NGO is an ivory tower either. You know, NGOs are dealing with huge amounts of pressures, and often without the kind of the underlying certainty that your organization is going to continue to exist in 7 or 10 or 12 years time. So just to acknowledge that, but at the same time, I would
agree with everything that Aoife is saying from an organizational point of view. But just looking at the ivory tower concept, there is actually a slightly unfortunate situation involved in academia. And it's the flip side of the coin of academic freedom, which is the freedom that you need to be able to do academic work and research. And the flip side of that coin is that individuals can actually exist in bubbles, you know, that they're not accessible. But those are the minority, really, in my experience. And I would focus on a term that Avril used, which is rewarding. And in my experience, and I've been doing, you know, engaged research for some 40 years now at this stage, it is the most rewarding type of research that you can do, because you literally see the impact of your work straight away. You're not waiting for a year or two to see a cold publication or whatever else. And not wanting to be flippant, but it's also very often great fun, which is another story. But genuinely to focus on the word rewarding, that would be my key, I think, word to take away from today. The best research is the most rewarding, and that is the engaged research.
Great, thanks very much for that, John. And I can appreciate as well that fun is often a dirty word when we're talking about funding applications and things like that, but actually that there is a real energy and dynamism if people can actually tap into that excitement. You know, because fun is often just an excitement about seeing something happening or an interaction or a relationship. And that I would be a real champion for not trying to make something that's not fun, but trying to understand that as humans, we work better when we're a little bit more relaxed and we're able to get on each other's wavelength. As a colleague of mine says, we tune into each other's radio station a little bit more, and that allows for us to crack jokes when the need arises and to relieve a little bit of tension when tension does arise as well. So, but another thing that did come up in terms of the questions, and I might kind of swing this around to yourselves, Avril and Chiara, is that idea about whether the universities should have a responsibility in terms of helping NGOs and community groups to apply for funding themselves. And having been on both sides of this fence, I think that this is a really interesting question, but I'd love to hear your views. And Emma, certainly feel free to come in on this too.
Yeah, Michael, I'll come in on that one. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I think, you know, we definitely need the universities to be supporting charities, NGOs to get involved. And and that's, you know, PPI Ignite, for example, that you're so involved in is been really proving itself in that way. But also we need the leadership to come from our own sector. It can't all be about the academic sector carrying us in this process. So I think it has to be a balance. And I think we're a little bit off still, where we're maybe not recognizing the inherent expertise that is in our sector. In terms of funding, I think that's a tricky one, because most Irish funding schemes, any that I'm aware of in the health social care space, it has to be the researcher who is the lead on it. You can't lead on it as an NGO partner. And you know, Emma knows far more about this than me, but it's a little bit different in Europe, and it's a little bit more balanced there. And I think maybe we need to look at that in terms of Ireland. Like the Irish Research Council New Foundations Award is a great way to get started, and you need a charity partner for that. But it has to be the researcher who leads on it. And that sets things up in a certain way from the very, very start that we have to just be careful of.
Thanks, Avril. Thanks for that. Emma, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I think that, you know, it's kind of almost an oxymoron if you have this engaged approach, but it's still very much led and completely controlled by the kind of academic side of things. I mean, that's not engaged, and that's not about equality, and it's not about, it kind of, again, whether deliberately or not, I don't think it's deliberate, kind of insinuates that maybe the charities wouldn't be able to do it, you know, wouldn't be able to take leadership in this space. Which again, and I'm sure it's all like what I've always found is throughout all of this, there's no malice. Everybody wants to get on, and everybody wants to kind of, you know, it's just lack of understanding. It just comes down to that. So I think that, and that's where the wheel would feel like it's so important that we encourage, and it's appropriate that it's coming from a charity, telling other charities, telling our members and the wider sector that we also need to take kind of responsibility here and take leadership here, because we're fully capable, and there's nothing really stopping us. And there's one of the comments in the chat was just around, there can be a little bit of a chip on the shoulder, anti-intellectualism, kind of sometimes feeling on the ground that like, oh, all of that is so far removed from what we're doing, and what we're doing is so much more practical. And I don't think that's helpful. We need to kind of dismantle the stereotypes and the assumptions that we each have, ivory tower versus, you know, out of touch versus, you know, all of the stuff that's happening on both sides. In order to kind of create a way forward, and to do that, charities need to take a bit of leadership as well, and be active in that.
Great. Thanks, Emma. And Chiara, I might swing you in on this and then over to John.
Absolutely. So I see that the conversation kind of took an interesting turn. We started with the responsibility of the universities, and then we moved on who should lead. I mean, should like a charity, like charities followers, or should they be leaders? So I think that we're kind of going back to the point that we had before about meaningful inclusion, in a way that I'm speaking from the point of view of Cluster 2. The Commission as an expectation that there will be some sort of academic leadership, like by on admission during the events. There can be like exceptions, but I would say that this is like the 99% of cases. However, there is a difference between, you know, academic leadership and, you know, charities just as a nice add-on, maybe to take like a little box. I mean, like charities, they can play a huge role, and engaged research can play a huge role as well. I have an example of a project that involves UCC. It is called Immerse, that is about the integration of refugee and migrant children in Europe. And that project involves 3 prominent charities, and also it involves a children advisory groups. So what I want to say is that basically there is scope for meaningful inclusion, and for co-design of the project. About the responsibilities of the universities, I think there is a responsibility of setting out resources And then linking it to what Emma said very clearly before, that networks, they just don't happen. And they're not something that you develop like 3 months before the deadline. I mean, they're a sort of dormant resource that needs to be cultivated over the years so that you can deploy that when you really need it. And I believe that to have, you know, a sort of a centralized point within the universities, some dedicated services, that can be a resource. Of course, I mean, you can have an equivalent from the charity sectors. And here I'm thinking obviously of Access Europe, I'm thinking of the Will, and I'm thinking, of course, about the individual networking efforts of organizations.
Thanks for that, Chiara. And again, I suppose it is always worth keeping in mind, particularly because the funding opportunities are so broad within the EU, within the European Union, that, you know, what we're talking about today is engaged research, where there is that expectation of having academic leadership being part of that as a process. But that doesn't mean that every single European funding opportunity requires that. What we're talking about is engaged research, that it is about that idea that, you know, that there would be that quadruple helix involvement there, where you can see different partners in different sectors working together. And John, again, I seem to be giving you the last word again.
No, it's fine. Two things. One, on the leadership issue. There are two aspects of leadership. When Europe or any other funding agency is looking for a higher education institution to be the lead applicant in a project, they're looking for two things. One, the governance machinery that ensures oversight in the first instance. And two, they're looking for deepest pockets, so that if something goes wrong, they can reach into those deepest pockets. You certainly wouldn't want the NGOs to be in that firing line, that's for sure. But that doesn't mean that the project has to be operated in that way. We've been lead applicants on many projects where it's been very clear that the NGO is the initiator of the idea and has the best resources, you know, to bring people around the table. And we've taken part in the project as a minor partner as opposed to a lead. So those are two different things. I'd say that. The other thing is from Emma's point about the ivory tower and the language that goes with that. We have the same thing in researchers, Emma, and it's researchers saying things like, I don't do politics and I don't do administration, you know, to which you'll say to those individuals, well, then you won't be going very far, because, you know, ultimately what we're talking about here is human nature, and it's human relationships, and maximizing the benefit and the power of those relationships in a way that we can generate product that's accessible to everybody. And that's fundamentally what it's about. That's my last word on the subject.
That's great, John. And thank you to all of our guests today and all of your inputs. That was fantastic. And to finish off, what I'd like to do, firstly, I would like to just acknowledge Sarah Bowman, who couldn't join us today, who's the Director of Strategic Engagement and Impact Assessment. Unfortunately, she couldn't join us at the last minute, but has played a huge role in this space and is a fantastic support to so many different people across the years who have done engaged research. And finally, what I would like to do is hand back to you, Emma, for the next steps and closing for our discussion today.
Absolutely. I just wanted to share what we were going to be doing next. So now one moment. Just 1 second now. So yes, apologies, next step. So as I said earlier, we're looking to do a training in civil society, or training for civil society on engaged research skills, and that will hopefully be taking place online. We're looking for around November. So if you're a civil society organization here today, please keep an eye out for that. And this will be all around, I suppose, kind of addressing what we're saying. It's about equipping civil society organizations to feel that they can confidently interact with researchers and confidently state what are their needs when it comes to research, and understand, you know, when is it appropriate to ask for an MOU, and what kind of, you know, all of these kinds of different things that need to be considered before taking on and engage research projects. So we'll be looking at that before the end of this year. Then we'll be looking at doing civil society and researcher networking events, so bringing them together, so like a very nerdy speed dating situation essentially, where we're looking to do those in person. And we're hoping this will be part of a series where we can cover a host of different topics. But we've looked at, seeing as this is a kind of an Access Europe initiative, we've looked at 3 key EU policy areas first. So the first one will be the Green Deal. So researchers working on anything to do with the Green Deal, climate, environment, circular economy, all of that kind of thing, and organisations in the sector who are working on those issues, so bringing them together. Similarly, under the European Pillar of Social Rights, you're looking at kind of diversity, inclusion, equality, those kind of topics. And then for digital transition, obviously one of the key challenges, societal challenges that we're facing. So we'll be bringing together organisations that are looking to digitalise, and researchers who are working in this area. So we will keep this group, everybody that was participated today, informed of all of those developments. You will receive all the follow-up, you will receive messages about all of these things, and hopefully that's just the start. Maybe we'll be doing one around health and medical research. We could be doing one around poverty or homelessness, whatever it is. And what we'll be really hoping for is if organizations on both sides, whether it's the academics or the researchers, we invite them to kind of come to us and tell us what they need and what they want, and then we can try and to create opportunities around that. But other than that, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody, to our speakers. We have Hugh O'Reilly, Kate Morris, Aoife Dean, Dr. John Bartlett, Dr. Ava Kennan, Dr. Chiara Loda, just excellent input from everybody, and from Sarah Bowman as well, of course, who couldn't join us in the end, but was hugely supportive throughout. I also want to thank our case study providers, Mary Rabbit and Brendan Mullery, for telling excellent, very inspiring stories there. And of course, Michael Foley as well for expert facilitation throughout. Thank you so much. I was very glad to have somebody who could kind of steer the ship for us. So I'm very, very happy about that. And of course, our funders, the Department of Foreign Affairs, who support Access Europe and make events like this possible. And to everybody for joining us today. I think this is the start of a really interesting conversation, and you'll definitely be hearing more about it as it unfolds. We are here to support you. So if you have any questions that we didn't get to answer today, or if there's anything that we can do to help you at Access Europe, please reach out to us. But thank you so much for your support and your participation. But that's it for me. I think that we are relatively on time, absolutely on time. Can't believe that. Well done, Michael. So I'll thank you very much to everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.